Greetings and welcome back. I am the Archivist, and it is my purpose to guide you through the records of cases that are not easily forgotten. The stories we explore here are filed away in the annals of criminal history, but they serve as stark reminders of the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary life. Tonight, we open a file that begins with a frantic phone call and a missing teenager, a girl loved by her family, trusted by her neighbors. But this story soon spirals into the digital ether, into a world of secret identities and hidden conversations, where a predator was patiently waiting. This is the story of how a single laptop, a gateway to a hidden world, held the key to unmasking a cyber killer and the devastating truth of a double life. In the quiet, suburban landscape of Fairfax County, Virginia, life for the Tarakji family was built on a foundation of faith, tradition, and close-knit bonds. They were a family who had moved to the United States from Syria, seeking a peaceful life and a bright future for their children. Their eldest daughter, 18-year-old Sarah, was the embodiment of their hopes. To her parents, she was a dutiful and loving daughter, a devout Muslim who respected their rules and cherished her family. To the neighbors, she was the sweet, responsible girl you could trust to babysit your children. She was quiet, known for her shy smile and her commitment to her studies. She was preparing to graduate from Falls Church High School, with dreams of a future that stretched out bright and promising before her. On a cold Tuesday in February, that picture of peaceful normalcy was shattered. Sarah was supposed to be at home. Her younger sister had been trying to reach her, but her calls went straight to voicemail, and her texts went unanswered. This was unusual, highly out of character for the ever-reliable Sarah. A seed of worry began to sprout, and it grew into full-blown panic when her father returned home from work that evening. The house was empty. Sarah was gone. Her coat and shoes were still there, but she had vanished. Her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Sarah was not the type of girl to leave without a word. She wouldn't have worried them like this. Their minds raced through every possible explanation, each one more terrifying than the last. Had she been taken? Had something happened to her on a walk? They called her friends. They called relatives. But no one had seen or heard from her. The hours crawled by, thick with an agonizing silence. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, they did the only thing they could. They called the police and reported their daughter missing. When Fairfax County police officers arrived at the Tarakji home, they were met with the palpable fear of a family on the brink. They listened patiently as her parents described their daughter. A good girl, a homebody, someone with no known enemies and no history of running away. She didn't have a driver's license, and she rarely went out alone, preferring the company of her family. The initial search began, following the standard protocols for a missing juvenile. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, speaking with residents and showing Sarah's photograph. They checked local hospitals and transportation hubs. But every lead went cold. Every door they knocked on provided no answers. It was as if Sarah Tarakji had simply evaporated. As the first day turned into a second, investigators started to dig deeper into Sarah's life, hoping to find a clue, anything that could point them in the right direction. They spoke at length with her family and friends, trying to build a complete picture of the 18-year-old, and the image that emerged was consistent and clear. She was a gentle soul, a little naive perhaps, but responsible and deeply connected to her family and her faith. There was no boyfriend her parents knew of, no secret meetings, no hint of any trouble in her life. The case was baffling. There were no signs of a struggle at the home, no ransom note, no apparent reason for her to have disappeared. Detectives were facing a frustrating void, a mystery with no starting point. But in modern investigations, there is always one place left to look, a place where our truest selves, our secret desires, and our hidden connections often reside. The digital world. The detectives turned their attention to Sarah's bedroom, a typical teenager's space. And there on her desk was her laptop. It was a closed book, a locked diary that they hoped held the answers they so desperately needed. They knew that if Sarah was leading any kind of life that her family didn't know about, the evidence would be on that computer. They took the laptop into evidence, a silent witness that they prayed would speak. The initial disappearance of a teenager is always a high-priority case. But the grim reality of law enforcement is that resources are finite. The first 48 hours are critical. Without a clear sign of foul play, the possibility that she was a runaway, however unlikely it seemed to her family, had to be considered. But that theory was about to be tragically and brutally dismissed. 2 days after Sarah was reported missing, a call came into the 911 dispatch. A pair of teenagers walking through a wooded area near a local elementary school, not far from the Tarakji home, had made a horrifying discovery. Partially hidden in the undergrowth was the body of a young woman. Police and forensic teams descended on the scene, taping off the area. The sense of dread was heavy in the air. The victim was soon identified. It was Sarah Tarakji. The quiet, shy girl who was supposed to be planning her high school graduation had been found. She had been killed. An autopsy would later confirm the cause of death. Investigators documented that she had sustained multiple knife wounds. The search for a missing person had just become a homicide investigation. The news was a devastating blow to the Tarakji family, their worst fears realized in the most horrific way imaginable. Their world, once filled with hope for their daughter's future, was now consumed by an all-encompassing grief and a burning need for answers. Who could have done this to their gentle Sarah, and why? The police now faced a new and urgent pressure. They were no longer looking for a missing girl. They were hunting a killer. The investigation immediately intensified. The wooded area where Sarah's body was found was scoured for evidence. Police looked for footprints, tire tracks, discarded items, anything the killer might have left behind. They re-interviewed everyone in Sarah's life, pushing harder this time, searching for any small detail that might have been overlooked. Was there a secret she was keeping? Was there someone she was afraid of? But still, they hit a wall. Her friends and family were adamant. Sarah didn't have a secret life. She didn't know anyone who would want to hurt her. The portrait of the innocent, dutiful daughter remained unchanged. It was against this backdrop of confusion and grief that the forensics team finally managed to unlock Sarah's laptop. As the computer whirred to life, it was like opening a door into a hidden room in her life, a room no one in her family even knew existed. What they were about to find would not only challenge everything her parents thought they knew about their daughter, but it would also lead them down a dark digital rabbit hole, straight to a predator who operated in the shadows of the internet. As investigators began to sift through the digital contents of Sarah Tarakji's laptop, they quickly realized they were looking at a life that was completely disconnected from the one her family described. The shy, devout, and sheltered young woman they knew was only one part of the story. Online, Sarah had crafted an entirely different persona. She was active on multiple social media platforms, but it was on Twitter, where she had built a vibrant and ultimately dangerous secret world. Under a pseudonym, she presented herself as a different person. She was more outgoing, more rebellious. She posted selfies that were a stark contrast to the modest photos her family was familiar with. She engaged in conversations and flirtations that would have been unthinkable for the Sarah her parents knew. She was navigating the complex and often perilous world of online relationships, seeking connection and validation from strangers. It was a classic story of a teenager from a strict household using the anonymity of the internet to explore a side of herself that she felt she had to hide in her real life. And it was this hidden life that had made her vulnerable. The detectives meticulously combed through thousands of messages, tweets, and interactions. They were looking for anyone who stood out, anyone who seemed obsessive, controlling, or threatening. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming, a tangled web of online acquaintances and fleeting conversations. But then, one name began to appear more and more frequently. A user who seemed to have a particularly intense and persistent connection with Sarah. His name was Elyas Al-Amin. Elyas Al-Amin's online profile didn't immediately set off alarm bells. He appeared to be a young man in his 20s, and his interactions with Sarah, at first glance, seemed like a typical online flirtation. They exchanged messages, they tweeted back and forth. But as the investigators dug deeper, a more disturbing pattern began to emerge. Al-Amin was not just another online friend. He was a constant presence, his messages often veering into possessive and demanding territory. He seemed to want to know where she was and who she was with at all times. The tone of their conversations shifted, revealing a relationship that was far more serious and far more volatile than anyone could have guessed. The digital trail showed that Sarah and Elyas had been communicating for months. Their relationship had escalated from casual chats to intense daily contact. They had, it seemed, fallen into a kind of online romance. But it was a romance built on a foundation of secrets and deception. Sarah was hiding it from her family, and as investigators would soon discover, Elyas was hiding his own dark nature. The police now had their first real lead. This wasn't a random act of violence. Sarah knew her killer, and she had met him online. They immediately began to build a profile of Elyas Al-Amin. Who was this man who had so deeply infiltrated Sarah's secret life? A background check revealed that he was a 24-year-old from Illinois. He had a minor criminal record, but nothing that pointed to a capacity for this level of violence. He worked odd jobs and seemed to live a relatively unremarkable life. But his digital footprint told a different story. Online, he was someone else entirely. He presented himself as a suave, confident individual, but his online history was littered with signs of anger, misogyny, and a deep-seated resentment. He was a man who seemed to have a profound disconnect between his real-world status and the persona he projected online. The timeline was crucial. Investigators tracked the final days of Sarah's life through her digital communications. They discovered that Elyas Al-Amin had not just been a voice on the other end of a screen. He had traveled from Illinois to Virginia with the express purpose of meeting Sarah in person. This was a critical turning point. The online relationship was crossing the dangerous threshold into the physical world. Their messages in the days leading up to her disappearance became more frantic, more fraught with tension. They had arranged to meet in secret on that fateful Tuesday. Police now had a name, a face, and a motive. They believed that Elyas Al-Amin had traveled to Virginia, met with Sarah Tarakji, and for some reason, that meeting had ended in her murder. The evidence was still circumstantial, but it was mounting. They needed to find him, and they needed to find the physical evidence that would link him directly to the crime. Using cell phone records, they were able to place Al-Amin in the Fairfax area at the exact time of Sarah's disappearance. The digital breadcrumbs were leading them straight to their suspect. They tracked his movements after the estimated time of the murder. He hadn't stayed in Virginia. He had fled, driving back towards Illinois almost immediately. This was not the behavior of an innocent person. It was the behavior of a man running from something terrible. An arrest warrant was issued for Elyas Al-Amin. Investigators from Fairfax County coordinated with law enforcement in Illinois, and a team was dispatched to his last known address. When they found him, Al-Amin was calm, almost unnervingly so. He denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Sarah, that he had never been to Virginia, but the evidence was already stacked against him. His car was seized, and what the forensics team found inside would be the final nail in his coffin. In the trunk of the car, they found traces of Sarah's blood. They also found a knife, consistent with the wounds she had suffered. And perhaps most damning of all, they found her cell phone, the very device she had used to communicate with him, discarded like a piece of trash. The story was now tragically clear. Sarah Tarakji, seeking an escape from her quiet life, had stepped into a digital world where she met a man who mirrored her own deceptions. He had lured her in with a carefully constructed online persona, feeding a fantasy of romance and excitement. He had traveled across state lines to meet her, but the fantasy had shattered upon contact with reality. The police couldn't know exactly what was said in those final moments, what argument or rejection led to such a brutal explosion of violence. But they knew that the man who had charmed her online was the same man who had ended her life in a cold, secluded patch of woods. Elyas Al-Amin, the cyber suitor, was a killer. He was arrested and charged with the murder of Sarah Tarakji. The arrest of Elyas Al-Amin brought a sense of relief to the community, but it opened a new chapter of pain for the Tarakji family. They were now forced to confront the devastating reality of their daughter's double life. The girl they thought they knew, the daughter they had raised and protected, had been hiding a secret world from them, a world that had ultimately led to her death. They had to grapple not only with the grief of losing her, but also with the shocking revelation that they hadn't known her at all. It's a pain that is almost impossible to comprehend. The feeling that you failed to see the danger your child was in, simply because you never knew where to look. As Elyas Al-Amin's case moved towards trial, the prosecution began to assemble its mountain of evidence. The case was a textbook example of a modern murder investigation, where digital forensics played just as crucial a role as traditional police work. The prosecution's narrative was built around the two distinct worlds that had collided with such catastrophic consequences: Sarah's carefully hidden online life and Al-Amin's predatory actions that bridged the gap between the virtual and the real. The cornerstone of their case was the data extracted from Sarah's laptop and cell phone and from Al-Amin's own devices. Digital forensic experts testified, walking the jury through the timeline of the online relationship. They presented the thousands of messages exchanged between Sarah, under her online persona, and Al-Amin. The jury saw the relationship blossom from initial flirtatious messages into something more intense and obsessive. They saw how Al-Amin's language became increasingly controlling, how he demanded to know her whereabouts and expressed jealousy over her interactions with others. The digital evidence painted a clear picture of a young woman being drawn into a web of psychological manipulation. The prosecution then laid out the evidence of Al-Amin's journey from Illinois to Virginia. They used cell phone tower data to meticulously track his movements, showing his vehicle traveling east, arriving in Fairfax County on the day of Sarah's disappearance, and being in the immediate vicinity of her home in the wooded area where her body was later discovered. This data directly contradicted Al-Amin's initial lies to the police that he had never been to Virginia. His digital footprint became an undeniable witness against him. Next, the physical evidence was presented. The forensic scientists who had analyzed his car delivered powerful testimony. They explained how the bloodstains found in the trunk were a confirmed match to Sarah Tarakji's DNA. The probability of it belonging to someone else was astronomical. This was the physical link, the proof that Sarah had been in his vehicle. Then came the matter of the knife found in his car. While it couldn't be definitively proven to be the murder weapon to the exclusion of all others, it was consistent with the types of wounds Sarah had sustained. And finally, the discovery of Sarah's cell phone in his possession was a damning piece of evidence. It was a trophy, a foolish mistake by a killer who thought he could outsmart the police. The prosecution also called witnesses who knew Al-Amin. Friends and acquaintances from his life in Illinois painted a picture of a man who was frustrated and angry, a man who harbored misogynistic views and often spoke of his frustrations with women. His online persona was a mask for his real-world insecurities. They argued that when Sarah Tarakji, the real person, perhaps did not live up to the fantasy he had built in his mind, or if she had rejected him in some way during their meeting, his narcissistic rage had exploded. The murder, they argued, was the act of a man whose fantasy had been challenged, and he could not handle the rejection. The defense, on the other hand, was left with very little to work with. The evidence was overwhelming. They attempted to cast doubt on the digital evidence, suggesting it could be misinterpreted. They tried to create alternative theories, hinting that perhaps someone else had been involved. But they could not explain away the cell phone records. They could not explain away the DNA evidence. And they could not provide a plausible reason for Al-Amin to have driven to Virginia and then lied about it. Al-Amin himself did not take the stand. He remained silent, a stoic and emotionless figure in the courtroom, as the story of his deception and violence was laid bare for the jury to see. For Sarah's family, the trial was an ordeal. They had to sit in court and listen to the intimate details of their daughter's secret life, details that were painful and shocking. They had to hear the cold clinical descriptions of how she died. They had to face the man who had taken her from them, a man who showed no remorse for his actions. Their grief was public, their private pain laid out in a sterile courtroom. They had lost their daughter twice, once to the secrets she kept, and again to the man who exploited them. After all the evidence was presented and the closing arguments were made, the case went to the jury. They did not need long to deliberate. The digital and physical evidence formed an unbroken chain, leading directly and unequivocally to Elyas Al-Amin. The jury returned with a verdict. They found him guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was quiet as the verdict was read, a moment of somber justice. For the Tarakji family, it was not a cause for celebration, but a confirmation of the truth they already knew. The man who had destroyed their family would be held accountable. At the sentencing hearing, Sarah's family was given the opportunity to speak. They spoke of their love for their daughter, of the bright future that had been stolen from her. They spoke of the deep, unending pain of their loss. Their words were a heartbreaking testament to the human cost of Al-Amin's actions. The judge, taking into account the brutal nature of the crime and the calculated deception that led to it, handed down his sentence. Elyas Al-Amin was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, a just and fitting end for a man who had used the anonymity of the internet to become a predator and a killer. The file on the murder of Sarah Tarakji was officially closed, but the lessons from her story continue to echo. The case of Sarah Tarakji and Elyas Al-Amin is a chilling cautionary tale for the digital age. It serves as a stark and tragic reminder that the people we interact with online are not always who they seem. The screen creates a barrier, a space where individuals can construct elaborate personas, hiding their true intentions behind a carefully curated profile. Elyas Al-Amin was not the charming, romantic figure he pretended to be. He was a man with a deep-seated anger and a capacity for brutal violence. He used the trust and naivety of a young woman to lure her into a fatal encounter. Sarah's story is also a heartbreaking illustration of the secret lives that many teenagers live online. For young people growing up in restrictive environments, the internet can feel like a lifeline, a place where they can explore their identity and form connections that feel impossible in their real lives. But this freedom comes with immense risks. Without guidance and open communication, they can become vulnerable to predators who are masters of manipulation, who know exactly how to exploit the longing for connection and acceptance. Sarah wasn't a bad kid. She was a young woman trying to navigate the difficult transition from childhood to adulthood, and she made a fatal mistake in trusting the wrong person. This case highlights the critical importance of digital literacy and open dialogue between parents and their children. It's a reminder that a parent's job doesn't end with monitoring their child's physical whereabouts. It must extend into the digital spaces where they spend so much of their time. It's about creating an environment of trust where a child feels they can talk about their online life without fear of judgment or punishment. A space where they can be taught how to recognize the red flags of a predatory individual. In the end, justice was served for Sarah Tarakji. Her killer is behind bars and will never be able to harm anyone again. But that justice does not bring her back. It does not erase the pain and trauma inflicted upon her family. They are left with the ghost of a daughter and a sister they thought they knew, and the horrifying truth of a secret life that they discovered only after it was too late. The story of Sarah Tarakji is a permanent entry in the archive, a solemn warning about the darkness that can hide behind a screen, and the devastating consequences that can occur when the digital world and the real world collide. Thank you for joining me in the archives tonight. The stories we examine are often difficult, but they are important. They remind us of the fragility of life and the complexities of human nature. If you found this account compelling, please consider subscribing and returning for our next entry. Until then, stay vigilant, and remember that the most important stories are often the ones that lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered.